My son deleted my savings on WhatsApp and left me alone. The morning started like any other, but by the time I'd poured my first cup of coffee, the world had already tipped sideways. I sat at the kitchen table in my small Detroit apartment, the chill of early autumn sneaking under the cracked window frame and brushing against my arms. The kettle hissed faintly as I waited, but I didn't hear it. I was staring at my phone, the screen glaring back at me with numbers that made my stomach drop. My life savings, decades of careful budgeting, of working double shifts, of scrimping so that I could leave something behind, had disappeared. Every last cent. I shook my head as if willing the numbers to change. Perhaps it was a mistake. Banks made mistakes, right? Maybe it would all be corrected once I called. My hands trembled as I scrolled through my WhatsApp messages, hoping for a notification, a transaction alert, something that could explain this nightmare. But all I found were blanks and the faint echo of messages I was certain I had seen before. It didn't take long for suspicion to creep in. It had to be him. My son. He'd been unusually helpful lately, insisting he was managing my bills and accounts to make life easier for me. And I had let him. I had trusted him as I had for decades. Now that trust felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Son, what is this? Where's my money? I whispered, my voice barely more than a croak. He appeared in the doorway almost instantly, smiling in that way he always did when he was trying to charm me into believing everything was fine. Mae, it's just a mistake. Calm down, okay? I'll handle it, he said, leaning against the door frame. His eyes avoided mine. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to be wrong. But my gut, honed over 70-some years of life, screamed otherwise. I could feel the betrayal in my bones, deep and bitter, as though someone had poured ice water through my veins. I pressed further. A mistake? Son, this isn't a few dollars. This is everything. Everything I saved since your father passed. How could you? His shoulders stiffened. He looked away, muttering something I didn't catch. His phone buzzed on the counter and he picked it up like it was a shield. My mind raced. Could it be reversed? Could I call the bank in time? Or had he erased it all, wiped it clean so there would be no trace? I sank into the chair, gripping the edges, tasting the bitterness of despair with my coffee. I could hear the city outside, the distant wail of a siren, the rumble of buses, the early morning chatter of neighbors. The world moved on, indifferent to my loss. And I felt smaller than I had in decades, though anger and disbelief simmered under the surface. Mrs. Lopez, my next-door neighbor and one of the few people who truly knew me, had noticed my distress over the past few weeks. She knocked softly, her voice trembling as she entered my kitchen. Mae, you've seemed off lately. Is everything okay? I looked at her, wanting to shout, to scream, to throw the phone across the room. But instead I shook my head and whispered, it's gone, all of it. My savings. Heath, my son. She gasped, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. Mae will figure this out. Don't let him scare you into silence. I nodded, a small spark of resolve flickering to life in the pit of my stomach. Fear had me frozen, yes. But grief and disbelief weren't going to make my voice disappear. Not now. Not after everything I had endured. I spent the rest of the morning gathering what I could. Bank statements, old receipts, even photos of checkbooks I'd kept tucked away in drawers. Each paper I touched felt heavier than the last, filled with years of careful work, careful saving. The smooth texture of the paper against my fingertips reminded me how tangible my life's work had been. And now it felt stolen. I called the bank. My voice, though shaking, carried the weight of fury and urgency. I need to know exactly what happened to my account. Every transaction. Every withdrawal. Every WhatsApp notification. The representative's calm, professional tone did little to soothe me. I understand, ma'am. We'll investigate. Can you give us your account details? I hung up after an hour, feeling no closer to answers. But something had shifted. Fear and grief were still there, yes, gnawing at the edges, but now mingled with determination. This wasn't going to be the end of the story. I wouldn't sit silently while someone, even my own son, stole my independence, my dignity, my freedom. I made a small promise to myself right there in the kitchen. I would uncover the truth. I would confront him. And I would reclaim what was rightfully mine. Even as the autumn wind rattled the window panes and the smell of brewing coffee lingered, I felt a spark of fire deep inside. A fire that had been there all along, waiting for me to ignite it. And for the first time that morning, I didn't feel entirely alone. I sat on the faded floral couch in my living room, phone in hand, staring at the empty space where messages should have been. The glow of the morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting stripes across the carpet, but it did nothing to warm the cold dread that had settled in my chest. Every notification, every ping that I had relied on for years to communicate with my son, now seemed like a betrayal. WhatsApp, the app that had once connected us, had become a graveyard for erased conversations and hidden truths. I traced back through my message history, scrolling past months, past years, hoping to find a clue. The old chats, the ones I remembered vividly, my son asking for help with bills, sharing jokes about my stubbornness, even sending photos of family dinners, were gone. Deleted. Just gone. My fingers trembled as I tapped and swiped, hoping it was some glitch. But deep down I already knew the truth. He had been manipulating me, erasing proof and hiding his tracks. "May, you've got to be careful," Mrs. Lopez, my next-door neighbor, said gently as she perched on the armrest beside me. She had noticed the tension in my hands, the hollow look in my eyes these past few weeks. "Something doesn't feel right. Have you looked at your messages closely?" "Every single one." I shook my head, bitterness twisting in my stomach. "I have, but it's like they never existed. And every time I ask him, he says it's nothing, just a mistake, that I'm imagining things." I closed my eyes, feeling a hot rush of grief and anger collide. How could the person I loved most, my own child, do this to me? How could he treat my life savings, my security, like it was disposable? I picked up my notebook, the one I had started in the previous chapter, and began writing down every suspicious transaction, every missing notification, every phone call where he helped me manage my finances. The scratching of pen on paper felt oddly comforting, a small act of control amidst the chaos. I remembered one particular incident. A week ago he had told me, "May, trust me, this is for your own good," while guiding my hand to approve a transfer on my phone. Now I understood. That help had been his way in, his foothold to manipulate and steal. The weight of realization pressed down on me. The grief was sharp, like shards of glass in my chest, but beneath it anger simmered. I would not allow myself to be a victim. Not again. Not at my age. Maybe it's time to get someone to help you retrieve those deleted messages, Mrs. Lopez suggested cautiously. "You don't have to do this alone." I looked at her, the early sunlight catching in her kind eyes, and nodded. For the first time since discovering my missing savings, a flicker of hope sparked in me. If I could recover these messages, I could see exactly what he had done. I could prove it. I spent the next few hours contacting a tech-savvy friend, Ms. Ramirez, who specialized in recovering digital data. Her small office smelled of electronics and coffee, wires snaking across the floor like metallic vines. She examined my phone meticulously, tapping, swiping, and murmuring under her breath. The faint hum of her computer and the clack of keys created a tense rhythm in the air. I sat silently, gripping my hands in my lap, every sound amplifying the anxiety and anticipation building inside me. After what felt like an eternity, she looked up, a small, triumphant smile tugging at her lips. "May, I think I found something. Not everything, but some of the deleted messages. You'll see." I leaned in, breath shallow, heart hammering, and saw the lines I thought were lost forever. Screenshots and recovered text showing my son approving transfers, deleting alerts, and even writing messages to himself to cover his tracks. The betrayal hit me anew, sharper this time. My hands shook as I held the printed screenshots, the paper feeling impossibly heavy, each one a testament to deception I had never imagined. He did this to me. He stole everything and tried to hide it. I whispered, my voice quivering. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but this time they weren't just for grief. They were for the empowerment I felt. I had proof. I had a way forward. I spent the next few days meticulously organizing the evidence, creating a timeline of transactions and noting suspicious behavior. Each discovery fueled my resolve. The fear that had gripped me since the morning of the vanished savings began to transform into determination. I was no longer just a frightened, betrayed mother. I was someone ready to reclaim her life. Evenings I sat on my porch, listening to the distant hum of traffic, the rustle of leaves in the crisp autumn breeze, sipping chamomile tea. I reflected on the strength it took to recognize betrayal, the courage it took to face it, and the clarity I now had to take action. Mrs. Lopez often came by, bringing cookies or just sitting silently with me, reminding me that I was not alone. These small acts of companionship became lifelines, tiny sparks of warmth in the dark, shadowed halls of deception. And in those quiet moments I began to make a plan. Confrontation wouldn't be easy. He would deny, twist, gaslight. But now I had proof. I could fight back. I could reclaim my savings, my independence, and my dignity. By the end of that week, as the sun dipped below the Detroit skyline and the orange light poured into my living room, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to fear and grief. I was taking the first steps toward liberation. The journey was just beginning, but I would not be silent. I would not be passive. And I would not let betrayal define the rest of my life. As night settled in, I closed my notebook and stared out at the empty street, the wind carrying the faint scent of rain. I will get it back, all of it. And he will answer for what he's done. I whispered to the darkness, my voice steady, resolute, and defiant. And for the first time since discovering my lost savings, I felt a spark of hope that burned brighter than fear, grief, or anger. The storm had started hours before, rattling the windows of my small apartment in Chicago, Illinois, the wind howling like it had secrets of its own. I could hear the distant rumble of thunder as I paced the kitchen floor, my hands gripping the edge of the counter so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every fiber of my being was on edge, a mixture of anger, fear, and anticipation coiling in my chest. Today I would confront him, my son, the one person I had trusted with my life and my savings, who had torn it apart without a second thought. He walked in just after the rain began to drum against the roof, shaking wet hair from his head and smirking as if nothing had changed. "May, it's just money," he said casually, leaning against the doorframe. "You're making too big a deal out of this." I froze for a moment, the words settling over me like ice. Just money? My throat tightened and I felt a surge of grief flare into anger so intense it nearly made me stumble. I had spent 70 years building my life, scrimping, saving, and protecting my future, and he had erased it all. With a deep breath, I forced my voice to carry. Just money. Just money. Do you know what this represents? Everything I worked for. Everything I sacrificed for our family. I slammed my hand on the counter, the sound echoing in the small kitchen like a gavel. The metallic tang of spilled coffee lingered in the air, mixing with a faint smell of rain wafting through the cracked window. He laughed nervously, glancing at the door as if considering running. "May, it wasn't like that. I was helping, you don't understand." "Helping?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Helping meant protecting me, not stealing from me. You deleted messages, erased evidence, and tried to cover your tracks. How could you do this to your own mother?" He said nothing, shifting uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the floor. The storm outside intensified, and a clap of thunder shook the windows as if echoing the fury in my chest. I could see the fear in his face now, the same fear I had felt for years but never acknowledged. Uncle Joe, who had come over after hearing my distress from Mrs. Lopez, stepped into the room cautiously. Maybe this is the time to involve a lawyer." You don't have to face this alone. His voice was calm, firm, like a lifeline in the chaos of my emotions. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes, not from weakness but from the release of long-suppressed feelings. You've lied to me for years, manipulated me, and now you want me to stay quiet? Oh, I am done being silent. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, each thump a drum of defiance. I grabbed my notebook, the one with all the compiled evidence, and slammed it on the counter. The papers fanned out, the printed screenshots of WhatsApp messages and bank records glinting under the dim kitchen light. My son froze, eyes widening as the reality of his actions reflected back at him. This proves everything. Every erased message, every deletion, every transaction. You tried to hide it, but I have it now. My voice was steady, carrying more strength than I had felt in years. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. No excuses. No more lies. I trusted you and you betrayed me. This ends today. The storm outside softened slightly, rain pattering gently against the windows, as if marking the beginning of something new. Uncle Joe nodded, pulling out his phone to schedule a meeting with a lawyer. May, you're not alone. You're going to get this back, he said softly, placing a hand on my shoulder. The warmth of his touch grounded me, giving me the courage to move forward. I sank into a chair, taking in the small, familiar kitchen. The faded linoleum, the chipped counter, the faint aroma of the burnt coffee from earlier. This was my space, my life, and no one had the right to take it from me. I sipped the now cold coffee, tasting the bitterness but feeling it fuel my resolve instead of dampening it. For hours I spoke with Uncle Joe, mapping out the plan. Gather more evidence, organize it carefully, and prepare to involve a lawyer who could hold my son accountable. The emotional weight was exhausting, but with each detail documented I felt lighter. Anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it had transformed into determination. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity and standing up for myself. Later, as the storm finally eased and the first slivers of sunlight peeked through the clouds, I sat on the porch, listening to the quiet drip of raindrops from the roof. My hands, still trembling slightly, rested on my lap, the notebook beside me. I thought of all the women like me, silent, betrayed, feeling powerless, and I promised myself I would not be one of them. I would speak, fight, and reclaim what was mine. The confrontation had been terrifying, but it had also been empowering. I realized something important. Fear could no longer control me. Grief could no longer define me. Anger could be a tool, not a chain. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope, bright and unshakable, burning in my chest. Tonight I would sleep knowing that I had taken the first real step toward justice. Tomorrow I would continue the fight, armed with evidence and unwavering resolve. And I would not stop until every lie was exposed and every betrayal accounted for. After the confrontation, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and a strange sense of clarity. The storm of emotions had passed, leaving behind a sharp determination I hadn't felt in years. I knew the next step would be grueling. I had to find undeniable proof of my son's betrayal. Not just his words, not just his evasive glances, but evidence. The kind that would silence his excuses and cement my path to reclaiming what was rightfully mine. I began by digging through decades of old financial records tucked into boxes in my attic. Dust motes floated in the sunlight streaming through the small window, sparkling like tiny stars over piles of yellowed papers and faded envelopes. I ran my fingers over the edges of bank statements, receipts, and old checkbooks, the paper rough beneath my fingertips, smelling faintly of old ink and cardboard. Each piece of paper told a story of careful planning, sacrifice, and foresight. A story someone had tried to erase. I spread everything across the dining room table in my Atlanta apartment, the stacks forming small towers of memory. I revisited the transfers he had made, comparing them to old canceled checks and my meticulously handwritten notes. The numbers didn't lie. Each withdrawal, each suspicious transaction traced back to him, orchestrated with precision, hidden in plain sight. I felt a pang of grief for the trust one had lost, but beneath it, a surge of empowerment. I could fight back now. Next, I turned to technology. My neighbor, Ms. Ramirez, a retired IT specialist with a keen eye for digital trails, came over to assist. Her small office smelled of electronics and fresh coffee, wires snaking across the floor like metallic vines. She tapped and swiped on my phone with practiced ease, her eyes scanning lines of code and logs. "May, look at this," she said after a few tense minutes, holding up the screen. The recovered WhatsApp messages were there, partially deleted but legible. Screenshots and text logs showing every manipulation, every deletion, every carefully orchestrated lie. I leaned closer, my hands trembling as I read each one. There was his plan laid bare. Messages instructing himself to erase notifications, screenshots of transfers, notes about conversations with bank representatives. He had thought he was clever, but he hadn't counted on my determination. The anger that surged through me was fierce, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was fuel. I organized the evidence, arranging it in a timeline that spanned years. Insert time periods: 1990s, 2000s, 21st century, from small withdrawals to large transfers. Each piece added weight to my case, a damning trail that could no longer be ignored. I sipped the chamomile tea Ms. Ramirez had made for me, tasting the faint bitterness, grounding myself as I pieced the story together. Every sip reminded me that this was real. Every page, every screenshot, every note, was proof of betrayal, but also proof of my resilience. The process was emotional. I cried more in those days than I had in years, not just from grief but from relief and empowerment. I thought about my friends, Mrs. Lopez, Uncle Joe, and the way they had stood beside me, quietly supporting me, believing in my strength even when I doubted it. I realized that empowerment wasn't just about confrontation. It was about reclaiming agency, one deliberate step at a time. By midweek, the final pieces of evidence were ready. I had screenshots, recovered messages, bank statements, and handwritten notes, all meticulously organized and dated. I spread them across the table, the documents forming a mosaic of betrayal that no one could dispute. My son's manipulations were no longer invisible. They were tangible, undeniable, and mine to wield. I paused, closing my eyes and inhaling deeply. The faint smell of old ink mixed with the aroma of brewed coffee, grounding me. My hands rested on the papers, feeling their texture, the weight of the truth pressing into my palms. And in that moment I felt something I hadn't felt in decades: control. The journey wasn't over. Confrontation, legal action, and recovery still lay ahead. But I now had the tools, the proof, and the resolve to face them. I would no longer be a passive victim. I would not allow fear, grief, or betrayal to dictate the rest of my life. Evenings I would sit on my porch, sipping tea, listening to the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of traffic. The world felt quieter now, the shadows less oppressive. I reflected on the years of trust, the manipulation, and the small victories I had achieved simply by uncovering the truth. Each reflection strengthened me. I realized that liberation wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming dignity, agency, and freedom. Finally, as night settled and the first stars appeared in the velvet sky above Atlanta, I felt a flicker of triumph. I had evidence, yes, but more importantly, I had courage. I had reclaimed my voice. And the battle ahead, though daunting, no longer terrified me. I was ready. With the proof in hand, I whispered softly to the darkness, "This ends now. I will take back my life, my freedom, and my dignity. And no one, not even him, will stop me." And for the first time in weeks, I felt the steady, undeniable spark of hope burning bright, guiding me toward the justice I deserved. The morning sunlight spilled across the polished conference table, reflecting off the neatly organized files I had carried from my apartment. The smell of fresh coffee mingled with the faint scent of legal paper, grounding me as I walked into the small office in Orlando, Florida. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from the weight of anticipation. Today I would face my son armed with truth, evidence, and a determination he could no longer deny. The room was quiet, save for the low hum of the air conditioning and the occasional rustle of paper. My lawyer, Mr. Thompson, a composed man with graying hair and sharp eyes, gave me an encouraging nod. Across the table my son sat, fidgeting, shifting in his seat as if the walls themselves pressed down on him. His smugness, so present in the past, was gone, replaced by unease. "May," he began, his voice hesitant. We can fix this." "I didn't mean for fix this," I interrupted, my voice steady, unwavering. "Do you know what you took from me? This isn't just money. This is my life, my trust, my independence. And I am taking it back." I placed the folder of evidence on the table, flipping it open so he could see the meticulously organized screenshots, deleted messages, and bank statements. Each page stared him down, unflinching. Mr. Thompson leaned in. "We've documented everything, and with this evidence the transfers can be reversed. Legally, your mother has every right to reclaim her funds." My son's face paled. He opened his mouth to protest, but the weight of the proof, coupled with the determination in my eyes, silenced him. For years he had manipulated, erased, and lied, but the truth was no longer invisible. Sitting back, I felt a rush of something I hadn't felt in decades. Empowerment. The fear that had shadowed me since the discovery of my missing savings evaporated, replaced with resolve. I was no longer a victim. I had stood up, gathered evidence, and demanded accountability. My heart still ached from the betrayal, but it also beat with pride. The lawyer guided us through the process. Notifications to the bank, formal recovery requests, and an agreement that my son would reimburse what he had taken. The room hummed with tension, but for the first time in years I felt a measure of control. My life, my freedom, was returning to me piece by piece. After the meeting, I stepped out onto the small balcony overlooking the city streets, the sunlight warm against my face. The scent of blooming jasmine from a nearby garden drifted up, mingling with the faint aroma of city coffee trucks below. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, letting the sounds of the city, the distant laughter of children, the murmur of conversations, the gentle hum of traffic, wash over me. I felt alive in a way I hadn't for decades. That evening I returned home and called Mrs. Lopez. "I did it," I said softly, my voice trembling but full of triumph. I faced him and I took back what was mine. "And it feels incredible." She laughed softly, joy in her voice. "May, you always had the strength. You just had to believe it. And now the world sees it too." I hung up and sat for a while, sipping tea and reflecting on the journey. It hadn't been easy. I had cried, trembled, and doubted myself. I had faced anger, grief, and fear. But through each challenge I discovered something profound. I was stronger than I had ever imagined. Betrayal could not define me. Lies could not erase my worth. And even in my 70s I could reclaim my life. Over the next few weeks, I reconnected with friends I had drifted away from, revisited hobbies I had abandoned, and even started volunteering at a local community center. Each small act of engagement, each laugh shared, each moment of self-care became a testament to my freedom. I realized that empowerment wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming joy, dignity, and agency in every aspect of my life. Late one night, as I sat on my porch under a blanket of stars, I whispered to the quiet night, "I am free. I am stronger. And I will never let anyone steal my life again." The wind carried my words softly, and for the first time in decades I felt at peace. I thought of the many others who might be in my position, silently betrayed, fearful, or unsure how to fight back. And I knew my story could serve as a beacon. Courage could come at any age. Justice could be reclaimed. And freedom, though sometimes delayed, could always be won. As I turned to go inside, The faint hum of my phone reminded me of the digital world that had once been the source of my pain. But now it felt different. I was no longer powerless in its grasp. I had faced betrayal, uncovered the truth, and emerged stronger. And I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would never allow anyone to take my life, my dignity, or my freedom again. If you've ever felt betrayed or powerless, know this. It's never too late to stand up for yourself. Share your story in the comments, subscribe for more real-life survival stories, and hit that like button if you believe in reclaiming your freedom. Don't let anyone steal your life. Fight, speak, and take it back.